So, welcome back to the Web3 Insights podcast, where we dive deep into the minds of Web3 innovators, builders, and visionaries. I'm your host, Aaron Hayhurst, and today I'm thrilled to be joined by Alon Muroch, who is the CEO of SSV Labs. SSV Labs has quickly made waves in the Ethereum staking world, and they're currently the fifth largest staking provider. Their focus on distributed validator technology has pioneered a new approach for staking, enhancing both decentralization and security. So today, we're going to explore the technology and vision driving SSV Labs forward, their recent milestones, and what the future holds for staking and decentralization. Alon, welcome to the podcast. It's fantastic to have you with us.
Thank you, Aaron. Great to be here.
Fantastic. Alon, let's start with your background. What initially drew you into the Web3 space, and what led you to establish SSV Labs?
I'm a kind of a veteran of the crypto space. I've been since probably 2012, sorry. 10, 11 years already. I'm a developer, so this is how I got my start. I contributed code to both the Bitcoin core back in the day in Ethereum. I worked on the Java version of Ethereum even before Ethereum launched. And along the way, I did a bunch of different things, but really the last 4 years, me and my company, SSV Labs, are very focused on staking. And we kind of created this protocol called SSV Network, which is the first distributed validator implementation. So DVT, or distributed validators, is a piece of technology that started out life in the Ethereum Foundation. And we kind of took it and spun it off into its own protocol. And that's really what we've been focused on heavily the past 4 years.
Fantastic. And so SSV Labs has become the fifth largest Ethereum staking provider in under a year. You know, an absolutely remarkable achievement, firstly. Could you share some of the key strategies and decisions that helped you to reach this milestone so quickly?
Yeah, I mean, we've from the even I would say even from kind of the early days of SSV, we were heavily focused on developers. This is what we thought will be kind of the type of user that will understand DVT the best and understand the values behind distributed validators. Ultimately, SSV is an infrastructure component for Ethereum, right? It's an infrastructure people use to build staking applications, and so developers are the ones that are really at the forefront of that. And so by being developer focused, this is kind of how we designed the product, but also how we marketed it and kind of how we approached growth. And I think that was a really, really important decision in our journey, because ultimately what happened was that not only developers led the way, but also every type of innovation came from developers. So when, for example, restaking came along, developers really kind of pushed the envelope and enabled restaking by creating the infrastructure. So, moving from just LSTs to LRTs, and ultimately LRTs are just, again, doing staking behind the scenes. And so by focusing on developers, that was a really key decision. Also, another part of that, or maybe the kind of the consequence of that, is that we wanted to have a protocol which is completely what we call zero coordination. So really, you can start using SSV as a developer without coordinating with a bunch of different offline entities and so on to run your validators, which is key because it just makes it very easy. So everything is really smart contract based, zero coordination. So all of those pieces together, I think, really made a difference. And also, a big part of that was really the commitment from the SSV DAO to kind of speed up this adoption of DVT. So with the incentivized mainnet program and all of that. So all of those three components, I think, played a major role.
Amazing. You mentioned the DAO there and the setup of the DAO. How do the development community get involved with that?
So SSV, being an infrastructural component for Ethereum, was super important to be a community-driven project. And so the DAO really led the way from day one, from decision-making on the development side. So every upgrade to the protocol is DAO decided, all the way to the way that DAO is actually financing development. So we are a grantee of DAO. And there's another team, for example, that is developing another client for SSV, which is a grantee of the DAO. So really the DAO is the one deciding everything. And also the DAO decided to incentivize the transition to DVT as kind of, a major decision, positioning DVT as a really good alternative for kind of traditional or legacy tech stacks. And so with the incentivized mainnet, really the DAO said every validator that moves into SSV gets some extra rewards. And so that really made a difference for developers to kind of move to SSV. And so, yeah, that was a key decision, definitely.
Amazing. That's cool. So the growth you've achieved relies heavily on grants and strategic integrations. Can you tell us about some of the most impactful grants and partnerships and how they are supported by SSV's expansion?
Yeah, so one is the core team, my company, SSV Labs, is grantee. So everything that we do is by a grant that we get from the DAO. We now added another team from Sigma Prime, which is one of the best Bitcoin chain developers, client developers out there. So they got a grant to develop a second client, which is, again, a key milestone if we want to become this public good for Ethereum project. And so that's a major grant as well. But there's a bunch of different other grants. So for example, there are explorers built to SSV, which are DAO based. There's a bunch of different projects that get grants from the DAO, from research all the way to even applications, taking applications and so on. So the DAO was really involved in that, in the growth, I think, proactively. And it's something that you can only really do if it's a community driven project, I think. There's not, you can't really do that if you're a centralized, just for profit project. And so, yeah, the DAO played a major role in that from day one all the way to today and going forward with kind of our future plans.
Cool. Okay, so you recently announced the Alon fork as a major upgrade to support scaling. For those unfamiliar, could you explain what the Alon fork is and how it also helps SSV handle the rapid growth as well?
Yeah, so the Allen fork was really something we planned, but didn't plan to be so quick because we didn't think we'll grow that fast. I mean, SSV today is managing close to 2 million ETH at stake, and we only launched really in a permissionless way at the beginning of the year. So the rapid growth kind of forced us to handle a lot of tech debt and scaling bottlenecks. And so the Allen fork is kind of the first step, a major step, but one of the first steps kind of solving that. The Allen fork really changed a bunch of different things. It changed and really optimized the way that consensus is being done within the protocol, and in general, the way that messages are being created, propagated, and processed. So it also involves, for example, networking and other. The overall result of that was really quite staggering. So post Allen, networking was dropped by networking, just receiving and sending messages on the network dropped by 90%. So you can imagine that just in terms of the processing power needed and bandwidth needed for running an SSV node dropped by 90%. CPU dropped by around 75 to 80%. All of that really means that one, you can run SSV on smaller machines, which is something we're really passionate about, because ultimately this needs to be run on just a simple computer, a simple NUC on Solo Staker, all the way to the biggest infrastructure providers out there. So you need something which is quite efficient, and obviously in terms of resources optimized. But then it also means that it's more scalable and it's just have a better performance. Just the network works much better. And so the Allen fork was a really kind of one of the first steps towards that. There's a couple of other things we'll probably do in 2025, but really it solved a lot of tech that we had before. And so in that regard, it's a major change. It probably touched all aspects of the protocol. So that was pretty crucial. We worked on it for around 6 months. So it was a kind of a major big fork. Also the first fork for SSV.
Yeah, 100%. What specific challenges in scaling, in scalability, did the Allen fork address in particular?
So specifically the way that, so before the Allen fork, every single instance of a validator on SSV had at least one duty every epoch, right? That's how the Bitcoin chain works. For that duty, the cluster or the group of operators operating the validator had to go through consensus and then post consensus. The thing is that if you start growing, then and you treat it as such, then each validator adds a bunch of different additional messages per epoch, right? What we did was we said, okay, we can, there's a lot of clusters or group of operators that operate more than just one validator between them. And so what you can do is really, if you have a bunch of validators in the same slot, for example, you can have just one consensus instance instead of 20, and one post consensus message instead of 20, and that times 4, right? Times the number of operators you have in the cluster. So if you squeeze that, 20 times 4 to 1 times 4, you saved a lot of bandwidth, you saved a lot of processing time for messages and so on. So that's one of the changes we did. The second change was the network topology. So before the Alon fork, every validator was assigned a specific topic in our network, a pub subtopic out of 128 available topics. So deterministically, whatever validator you have. Again, the problem with that is that if you have an operator which is opted into a bunch of different validators, let's say 500 validators, which is the max per operator on SSV today, the result was that operator had to opt in or rather listen to almost all of the topics. If you listen to all of the topics, you actually need to process a lot of messages because you're not just an operator, you're also propagating messages. And so by processing those messages, one of the key things in the pipeline is actually verifying signatures. We're using BLS and RSA signatures. It takes a lot of overhead to verify so many messages. And so by changing the network topology and instead of assigning a specific validator to a topic, we're actually assigning a specific committee or specific cluster to a topic. That means that on average, even the biggest operators are actually assigned much less topics. So instead of let's say 120, 128 topics, if you are like a really big operator, you're actually going to be assigned a few of them. And so you by changing network topology, you also change the number of messages you need to verify as an operator just by propagation alone, right? And so those two changes really made a major difference. There were a bunch of different other kind of optimizations we did within the network, within the node, but those two changes were really the major changes. There's kind of in the future, there's even further changes we can do in network topology to even kind of make it horizontally scalable. So basically, even if you scale it infinitely, the kind of the load on an average operator will kind of stay the same because you're scaling it up horizontally, not vertically. And so again, all of those changes are what kind of made a major difference pre and post Alon fork.
Awesome stuff. SSV is also known for its unique approach to restaking. What role does SSV play in the restaking ecosystem, and why is this significant for both the industry and users as well?
Yeah, so actually it's a two-part answer. So part one is what we're doing today with restaking, and part two is our kind of plans going forward. So today, actually, a lot of the native restaking in Eigenlayer, for example, is running on SSV. So I think it was around 40%. Because we're working with developers and all of the LRTs and all of that were really great in adopting SSV almost from day one. Then a lot of them are actually running their native restaking on SSV. So SSV is very much involved in restaking today, the protocol. Add to that the fact that most of the, if not all of the LRTs are using SSV, and also their operators are operators within SSV. So it's kind of a close-knit community where most of the people are interacting with SSV in one way or the other. So that's what kind of we've been growing up in 2024. Looking at this landscape and that kind of goes maybe into a bit more depth in kind of where we want to go and kind of future plans potentially. If we're looking at what's happening with staking in general and validators in specific, so I can create this trend line, which is for me becomes very, very obvious. So back in the day in 2020, when Bitcoin Chain was launched, validators only really did one thing, right? They secured Ethereum. That's it. Almost as soon as the Bitcoin Chain launched, MEV came along, and all of a sudden those validators had another type of thing they can do, another type of optional opt-in type of thing they can do, which is MEV is just a service, right? It's a service for ordering transactions, nothing more. 2 years went by and all of a sudden restaking came along. At least the original thesis behind restaking was that we wanted to reuse validators to secure and bootstrap other protocols, right? Today, restaking kind of moved away from that, but that was the original thesis. And now you're seeing another type of category for services, which is validated commitment, stuff like pre-confirmations, base sequencing, and so on. That's another type of category for validators to opt into and offer services. So the trend line seems to be that validators as an entity have more and more things they can do for more and more rewards. This is kind of, in other words, validators themselves, not necessarily their capital, but the validators themselves are becoming a new type of asset class for generating both services and rewards on the other hand. And so with that kind of notion or idea in mind, we've been researching a lot of the past 6 months. What is our approach to that? Because one, SSV is growing fast and it has a lot of validators, but also it has a network of validators, which is something very unique. Most other topologies of services don't really treat their validators as a network, but rather the actual capital behind the validator as a network. So, if you take one of the biggest LSTs, what they sell is the idea of liquid staking, right? The actual capital behind staking. But they don't treat their validators as a network of its own. It's not an asset class that they're looking at. But now with this trend line happening that I've talked about a minute ago, and understanding that the validator has something to offer, which is really, really important, that kind of set the tone to what we're starting to think of and building towards 20, which is actually making SSV more than just staking, but making it a based application protocol. Based applications are the idea that, and I kind of drew the name from, base sequencing and base pre-confirmations and so on. Based applications is a very simple idea where you have a type of service or a protocol that uses Ethereum validators as the underlying operational, let's say, front for the service. So, if you're looking at MEV, for example, MEV is clearly a based application or based service, right? It needs validators on the L1 in order to even function, right? But it can also be an oracle. It can also be a bridge. It can also be any type of service that brings value to Ethereum. And the reason why is that validators have this unique set of properties which nobody else has. Validators, first of all, belong to the greater Ethereum validator set, which has its own security properties like distribution and the fact that we have a really solid assumption that less of a third of them are malicious. They have on-chain reputation. Like you can go to any validator and see how well they're performing the past even 3 years or 4 years since the genesis of the Beacon chain, if they were deposited back then. And so on and so forth. And so those types of properties are really important for both stuff like MEV, but also for any type of service. If I'm building a bridge, I want it to be secure. And so if I can bootstrap using the validated set of Ethereum, that's amazing. And so SSV's kind of future plans are to be this based application protocol, basically enabling anyone to kind of utilize the validated set of Ethereum to bootstrap any type of service, any type of application. And that in some way really competes with the notion of restaking in a very different way. But it has a lot of really interesting benefits and advantages over restaking. So our approach is kind of, we're both supporting restaking because we're part of that, but also we have this notion that we can do better than that. We can reutilize this new asset class, which really wasn't defined a minute ago, to do a lot of the things that restaking wants to do in a cheaper way, more aligned way, and actually more scalable way as well.
Yeah, for sure. You mentioned sort of briefly there about looking ahead within that, but what's your future vision for the future of SSV Labs and DVT as we sort of head into 2025?
So my plans are, so DVT was created for a simple idea that we wanted to make infrastructure for staking better. Basically, we wanted to make the validator of Ethereum stronger, more robust, more decentralized, and so on. And I think DVT achieves that. But as time goes by, we understand that economics play a major role in that shift and in those types of decisions. It's not just about decentralization anymore. It's about how do you utilize staking in a way that is both good for Ethereum, but also good for the staker? Especially the more stake there is in Ethereum, the lower the APR on Ethereum. So there's this correlation between those two things. And so the future of SSV with this based application protocol future is combining the two. So it's the idea that we take DVT, which already works and already works well, and we attach this economical layer to it. This is a type of a marketplace for it, where it's not only you can run decentralized validators, which are great for Ethereum, you can also make more rewards doing so. And so it has a lot of effects on Ethereum itself. So, one of the main things we want to kind of push in Ethereum is the idea that staking should be decentralized. We want to encourage solo stakers. We want to encourage small shop operators and so on. Well, one of the things we need to do in order to kind of encourage them is to manage the rewards. Because if I'm a solo staker and I earn 3% a year, that's nice, but it's really me volunteering to be a solo staker. There's really no substantial incentive for me to do so, just my own will, or I'm passionate about. But if you introduce a marketplace of economical incentives for it, with based applications, then potentially as a solo staker, I can make significantly more money. And all of a sudden, this becomes from, just volunteering or kind of, my own thing, maybe potentially be a passive income or even more than that. Now, combine that with a bunch of different programs there are today, with stuff like Lido and Rocket Pool and EtherFi, which they enable you to run their validators. If you post a bond for, let's say, 2 ETH or something along those lines, that if you can take 2 ETH, run a Lido validator, and then take that validator and opt into a few other based applications through SSV, earn extra rewards, then all of a sudden that 3% can potentially become 30%. Now with 30%, all right, that's really interesting now. And then that means that if I can, take maybe not 2 ETH, but maybe 20 ETH or maybe 100 ETH as a solo staker, and now run a bunch of validators from Lido and EtherFi and Rocket Pool, then all of a sudden I have a business to run for something I'm passionate about, and that strengthens solo operators, that strengthens small time operators. That's not something which is available today. And so it has a lot of effects both on the validator itself, but also on Ethereum itself. And so I think the vision we have is essentially the same, just the market changed and we changed with it. The idea is really the same. We want a decentralized and really robust validator set for Ethereum. That's what we want. That's what everyone wants. The problem with that is that today it's not just about technology, it's also about economics. And so we want to bring the economical part as well, not just, the infrastructure or the protocol itself, like DVT. And so the vision really didn't change, the market did. And so we're shifting with the market, and so the economics of staking becomes, I think, a prominent piece we need to tackle in 2025.
Yeah, you mentioned obviously shifting with the market there. Are there any specific trends or advancements in particular that you think are sort of, shaping the ecosystem?
Yeah, so it goes back to the idea I've talked maybe 10 minutes ago, which is it seems like the validator itself is becoming this asset class, and it does more and more. And so I think that's the major trend here. This idea that if Ethereum is becoming this settlement plus data availability layer, which is what it aims to be. By the way, also there's a subtle shift in the vision of Ethereum. Also, Ethereum started out life as a world computer. Now it's a settlement and DA layer, which is a very different vision, because it means that most interactions ultimately won't be directly with Ethereum. It's going to be with a bunch of services building on Ethereum, right? So there's a subtle change in Ethereum's vision as well, and in that it means that Ethereum is really this really big validator set with settlement and DA on top of it. And so the validator set becomes a very interesting part of that. So with that, the market started to change. It gave way to obviously L2s, which are really big right now, but it's not just L2s. It's a bunch of different things exploding. And so this change of the market meant that, okay, there's a lot of opportunities now to do things which maybe 2 years ago were really in the domain of the Ethereum Foundation, and today they're not. So, 2 or 3 years ago, the Ethereum Foundation really worked hard on, how to make it more scalable and accessible and so on. Now they're still working on it, but the endpoint or the service that actually interacts with the user, it's not Ethereum anymore. It's going to be the L2, so Base and Optimism and Arbitrum and so on. And then wallets are changing. And then if you have more gas space, then you can start doing things like co-processing. And obviously there's a bunch of different blockchains and chains between them and L2s between them. So bridges and oracles and stuff like that become really important. So all of that's starting to build, but at the base of the pyramid is a simple, lonely validator that does the work, right? That's where everything starts and everything ends. It's a settlement layer, so everything starts and ends there. And so that shift is really important, and that's what gave way to this. I think that we can build a lot of value on top of this validator set of Ethereum, and that's what gave way, I think, to this notion of based applications, which can be bigger than what it is today. The idea that you can reutilize that infrastructural component called the validator set of Ethereum to really bootstrap a whole new marketplace of different services, and it's an enabler that enables other enablers. So it's an enabler that enabled us, which we are in of ourselves and our enabler to other services and so on. So I think that's kind of the major change in the market that happened. Restaking really opened the door, I think, for the idea that you can do more with staking. But I think based applications opened the door to the idea that you can do more with the validator, not just staking.
Yeah, for sure. Finally, then, just to finish up very quickly there, as SSV Labs continues to grow, what do you see as the biggest challenges and opportunities for the Ethereum staking ecosystem in particular over the coming years?
I think centralization still remains the number one issue or challenge. There's a real threat that if my vision is correct, there's a real threat that it's going to be an all or nothing or or kind of a winner takes most type of deal, which is not great at all.
Sure.
You want the vision I have with based applications, but you still want the basics of decentralization and robustness. You cannot compromise, because if you compromise,
100%.
you're compromising the entire system. So that still remains the main challenge. And so I think that the idea that the Ethereum ecosystem is so passionate about things like client diversity, decentralization, solo stakers, those type of terminology, which often gets lost in bull markets, I think that still is fundamental. It's something we need to focus on. And so we need both the technology in place to enable it, but also we need the economics. We need to make sure that we don't develop something where the bigger you are, the more you earn, and you can just kill everyone else. We need something that really empowers people to compete. And so that still remains, I think, the number one challenge.
Yeah, 100%. Completely agree. Couldn't agree more there. Alon, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing these insights. It's exciting to see how SSV Labs is shaping the future of staking and decentralization. To our listeners, thank you for tuning in. If you enjoyed this conversation and want to learn more about SSV Labs, be sure to check out their website at ssv.network and explore their resources. And of course, if you haven't already, please do like, subscribe, and share the Web3 Insights podcast series for more in-depth conversations with leaders in Web3. Until next time, keep exploring the world of Web3 and the innovation shaping our decentralized future. And thank you so much for listening. Alon, thanks again for coming on. Appreciate your time.
Thank you, Aaron. Thank you very much.